Hi everybody, welcome to this week's edition of Rauscher Racing Weekly. I'm filling in for Thomas, I guess, this week. It's a little bit of a different show. I'm David Rauscher.
I'm Derek Rauscher.
We're going to take you back through time, I guess, a little bit, with a little bit of our history and why Derek and I got into racing. Kind of where it all started with our uncles, our dad, that sort of thing. So for me, it started... I was a little grease monkey boy growing up, going over to my Uncle Pete's every weekend, just about every other night through the week, working on race cars, building them from scratch, tuning on things, that sort of stuff. Derek was real little. I think my mom was pregnant with him when I was helping Uncle Pete work on race cars and I guess kind of learning, kind of what to do, probably what not to do. The what not to do portion, I remember when Uncle Pete was putting a car together and we go over in the first night, we walk in and my cousin's Kathy's there and we walk in, we're like, hey everybody. She's like, oh, we're off to a good start. Pete's already got glass in his eye. We all look at each other, we're like, well, that happened quick. And I remember this, I was little, I don't know if I was 8, 9, 10 years old probably. I don't even remember really. But, I don't know. The memories that it brings back, going back through time. You'll see in some of the photos, these cars, they're nothing like what you'll see in a later show of what Derek and I drive. Our cars are pretty up to date. I wouldn't call them quite state of the art, but they're pretty badass machines compared to what you'll see in this show. But I don't know. I really don't know how to do this other than we got a couple of special guests that'll be on the show this week. We have my mom, Nancy, which we're in her house filming this because the weather is kind of crappy out at our house. And then my Aunt Ellen drove in from Fernley to be on the show. She dealt with the weather to help with this. Our other aunt, Linda, was going to come, but from what I understand, she had to work, wasn't able to make it. So maybe we'll get her in on a later show, but... it's going to be like a time machine, I think, this week, and we'll get through this. It'll be a lot of fun.
It will. I'm looking forward to looking at some of the old pictures because I wasn't around for it. So
right, yeah, you're probably going to get a pretty good history lesson out of this too. So,
oh yeah,
but yeah, like I said, you're gonna see how we all got started in this.
So we'll be right back from a message from our sponsors.
Welcome back to Rauscher Racing Weekly. I'm Nancy. I am the mom of David and Derek. I'm the grandmother of Blake, Evan, and Brent. And I'm here tonight with my sister Ellen, and we're here to give you some history on how Rauscher Racing became back in the 70s when my sister Ellen's husband Peter raced at the Championship Speedway in Carson City. And her brother-in-law, Jerry Johnson, he also raced there. So I'm going to turn it over to Ellen, and she'll give you a few pointers on background of what the boys did back then.
Well, let's see. We used to paint the cars ourselves. We didn't have wraparounds or we didn't have these fancy numbers to stick on. We had to stencil and spray paint with a rattle can all the numbers, and we painted all of our cars by hand, and then we went out and loaded them up on the trailer that either my husband Peter or my brother-in-law Jerry made, and we'd load them up and head on out to T-Car Speedway.
It was a fun Saturdays. We were at the racetrack every weekend, and that's kind of what I'm doing now as a grandma. I go to the boys' races and watch them kart race on the weekends when racing is had going on. Back then, I can say that the safety issues in those cars are not like what they are today. The guys never wore fire suits. They did not have race shoes. The only thing that was really required was a helmet. They didn't have neck rolls, and they were held in most of the time just by a normal regular seat belt. They didn't have the shoulder belts and things like that back then, like what they do today. So back then, I guess we were taking a lot of chances compared to what the younger generation is doing today. And we didn't have...
And when we first started out, we didn't even put roll cages in.
Yeah,
we had no roll cages. It was just paint them, take all the windows, all the glass out, and get on in and take the back seats out, and you could still have a passenger, so you could keep the passenger seat in. And then eventually they decided after a year or so that we needed to start using roll cages, and but we still didn't need the fire suits or the racing shoes or anything like that.
And the cars that the guys would race and that would be stripped out were just junk cars. They were regular street cars. There was nothing special to the motors. Just regular standard street tires back then. They didn't have racing tires. We weren't talking race fuel. When the race cars needed gas, we pulled to the gas station, filled that car up on the trailer, and off to the track we went. They didn't have a lot of safety requirements or anything like that, like what they do today.
Mm-hmm. And also Linda Johnson, she was racing in Powder Puff there at the same time as her husband Jerry Johnson. She couldn't be here tonight because she's working. But I wanted to say a little bit about her racing. She did pretty well doing her racing, and she raced about, I think, every car that her husband had made and that he raced. She raced it in Powder Puff. And then she also rode with my husband Peter as a passenger and had a really good time doing that. She loved riding with him because he was more of a daredevil and tried to push people out of his way, and she just thought it was the greatest thing.
And Jerry, he also continued on for a little longer than what Peter did. He also raced out at the Friendly racetrack, mm-hmm. and he raced there a few times. Linda also did Powder Puff racing out there as well.
Mm-hmm. She did.
The pricing, to get a race car back then, it was...
We would search for cars without titles. We would say, we'll give you $50 and take it off your hands. And just because it didn't have a title, we got it pretty cheap, but the car was like immaculate. It was one that was better than some of the cars that we were actually driving on the street. And we had to rip them apart and tear them down and get them ready to go.
And like for tires, we would look, and tires, we didn't care what the tires were like. Ellen and I would go out on a Saturday morning prior to loading for racing. We would go to the used tire stores and pick a tire up for $5 or $10 or whatever we could get, and just in case they got a flat tire on the racetrack. We didn't care what the tread looked like. We were good to go and happy when we found them.
Yes, and Linda and I used to do the same thing when Nancy wasn't there. We would go and try to find extra tires at all of these tire shops so that we would have tires to put on our vehicles. And then we also, I remember really one time that my sister Linda and I, we were having to work on a vehicle because we worked all week, and Pete and Jerry worked all week, and so we had to work on their car where they were going to the parts stores and getting parts for the car, and then we would get it thrown together Friday night and Saturday morning just to get out there to race. And then Steve would come over, Nancy's husband, and work with us and try to get the cars ready to go, and Linda and I were underneath a car Just I was changing a shock and she was changing something else, and so we would just pitch in and help out as we can so we could just get those cars out there on Saturday night because it was a lot of fun.
And that's what they used to say all the time. Come on, guys, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. And then you'll hear later in later years here of racing that's what I told my daughter-in-laws. Come on, girls, it's gonna be fun. And so now they're having that experience with their kids today, and when their husbands were racing. So it's been. Racing has been just a way of life. I love it. I wasn't one to get on the ground. I'm not the one who likes the grease. I was the girl that kind of stood back. And I would watch Ellen. She would get greasy. Myself, no, I'm not doing that. But what I would do is I would take the masking tape and newspapers and tape the cars off when they needed to be painted, because we never left it just as a street looking car. We always had to put the numbers on it.
And stars. My husband Pete loves stars. He put stars on one of his brother's cars one time when Jerry was underneath working on it. Peter just put stars all over it, and when Jerry got out, he saw stars.
So it's been many great moments, lots of great memories, and as it is now, we're still making memories, and I'm so happy to be able to watch my grandsons race and have watched my sons race. It's been wonderful. So racing's kind of like in our blood, and it's been going on since back in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now into the 2000s. And welcome back to Rauscher Racing Weekly. We're here going back through some family history at the beginning of our racing. Ellen can tell you about how we did timing, because back then we didn't have timing lights and transponders and receivers, and the guys looked and seen what was on the track. I didn't do the timing. Of course, I was one of those fans, like I still am. I was in the grandstands watching. So Ellen will be able to tell you some more about how they timed the cars.
Well, we used, when they'd go around the track, we'd start at the flagman, click the stopwatch, and they'd go around again and click it again. And then we could see how fast they were going, and then we'd get our paper and pencil and write it down. That's the way it was done back then. Now it's totally different. They have different apps they can get the timing from. So that's changed a lot. Also, what's changed a lot is back then the cars that we raced were a lot bigger and heavier, so we'd have to try to get weight out of them. So we'd cut metal out where it wasn't supposed to be until we needed to put some bracing bars in, and so the bars would go in the front and bars would go in the back, so that way if anyone hit us, then they would surely know it. So then another thing I want to discuss is like our fond memories. I have a fond memory of my husband Peter. He was a terror on the track. He would run into people all the time just to push them over the side. He would spin them around on purpose. He was a fun guy. Everybody loved him the way he raced because he made it exciting and not boring, going around the track, around the track, around the track. He had to do some bumping. So that's what he did. He did some bumping. And then people would get mad. I mean, there was other people that would be doing the same thing, because we used to have jalopies, which is a race that they could do that in. They would bump wherever they could get bumped and just push them out of their way. And so that's the way it was done back then. And it was so fun. We'd have a rowdy crowd in the stands. We've had rowdy crowds out in the pits. There would be some fights now and then too. A lot of yelling because of the different drivers doing different things to the other drivers. So we've heard a lot of earful. And then my fond memory of my husband Peter is that when he was racing the number 62 Cadillac, he got up when he won the race, or when he won the race, he would get up and he got up on top of his car, on the very top, and he'd go, yeah, yeah, and the crowd was just going wild. They loved him. They were just going crazy. And then when he went from the B main to the A main, they were even more rowdy. The crowd was, yay, that he came back out. It was fab. It was a fantastic night, and we had a lot of fun. Nancy, what was your fondest memory?
I think one of my fondest memories was the night that David and Derek's dad, he decided he was going to get in the car with Peter. At the time, I was pregnant for Derek. And he says, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to be fine. And I'm thinking, well, all right. But I know what Pete does, and he did have a lot of fun. And to give me some excitement for that night, they went off the end of the racetrack over the embankment. And, of course, I was pregnant for Derek at the time, and I am standing in the stands. And I had everybody, are you okay? Are you okay? They're going to be fine. But that was one of my moments. Again, out in the pits, there used to be some altercations. It was a rowdy crowd back then, and you didn't have people running around thinking that everybody had to be nice to one another. Everybody was there to have a good time, and it was great times.
They would root for their own drivers.
Everybody rooted for their own drivers, and of course everybody wanted to be number one, and it's still like that today. Everybody has their drivers, they have their favorites, and everybody's there for one reason, and that is to win the race. But it has been some great, great memories, and I'm very fortunate to have had this experience, and for my boys to be able to grow up in racing. It's something that they seem to have enjoyed. David, he loved going out with his dad and with his Uncle Pete working on the race car. We would be at Ellie and Pete's house, and that was our life. That's what we were doing. Boy, we were going to go racing. David was one of his Uncle Pete's biggest fans. He was out there getting dirty, getting greasy, and then he'd come in the house and say, look at me, Mom, look at me, I'm all grease. And he's still doing that as a dad today. He loves his racing.
Welcome back to Rauscher Racing Weekly. Now that you got to hear from my mom and my aunt about their way the cars were, how about we take a look at some of the cars that they were talking about.
What'd you guys think about that? I think those cars were pretty cool for what they were. That's the true epitome of what a stock car was back in the 70s, 80s. There's still some older cars out there running around the local short tracks. They're pretty awesome to see, the old Chevelles and Novas and whatnot. But it's nowadays, like Ellen said, now we have wraps and we have vinyl stickers, and everything is so much easier than back in the day when they were painting those cars with a brush or a house roller. I mean, you talk about, at the time, it didn't seem like it was low budget, but you look back at it for what we spend now to go racing to what they were doing, that was some low budget stuff, but it was old school and people really liked it. So, I wish we could, I hope that kids that go to the track nowadays have that same enthusiasm as I did out there rooting for my uncles racing. And, like they were saying, in the pits was rowdy, and the crowd, it was rowdy. There was fist fights in the pits, people swinging crowbars and stuff. You were there to win, and your driver was the best, even if he sucked. You thought he was the best. It didn't matter, and that's still the same today. We go to the track with kids, or people that we raced with, kids that our kids race with, and we're like, man, that guy's really booty. But you go talk to their parents or their crew guy, and they're number one, man. And that's the way it's got to be at the track. Because if you're not there to win, you're wasting your time.
There's no point in going.
Right, exactly. I for one, I don't take my cars to the track if I don't think I can win. I don't take the boys' cars to the track if I don't think they can win. It is a lot of fun, but we're there to win.
If you don't have a shot to run up front or be competitive, it's not worth going.
Right.
It's too much money now.
Right. Yeah. Believe me, it ain't cheap. Like, we're always talking about sponsors. We can't fit enough names on those cars to help us out. But like Ellen and Mom, they had a fond memory. I've got a few. Like I said, the one when Uncle Pete got that glass in his eye when we first got there. But I don't know what it was. Another fond memory for me is Uncle Pete, when he raced, had an open-faced helmet with like the bubble visor on it. And that was the coolest damn thing to me. And I remember there was one night he won a trophy dash at T-Car. And Sunday morning when we got up and we went over and got the car unloaded and got it all cleaned up, you have to have the photo sessions with those cars. My grandpa Lloyd was there taking pictures, back in the day when Pete would bring home trophies. And I was no different, man. When he won that trophy, I had to have a picture of him with that trophy with his helmet on. I don't know what it had to be about that damn helmet, but he had to have that thing on. It was the greatest thing for me.
My fond memory, I wasn't old enough, I wasn't even around yet when all this happened, was with David taking me to T-Car and watching every Saturday night. We went to just a normal Saturday night show to when they had sprint cars there, to super modifieds and the super trucks.
Right.
And that's really where it all went from there. That's every weekend we went was a good memory.
Yeah. T-Car Speedway was a NASCAR sanctioned track. They had big name guys that came there. Mike Skinner used to run in NASCAR. His dad, Grandpa Skinner, ran at Carson with my uncles. So for people to think that you can't get somewhere from a little hole in the wall town, there's guys in NASCAR, that are retiring from NASCAR now, and they're in there today that came from small little towns like that. It's so cool. But I'd have to say another one of my cool memories is taking Derek, when I got my license, being able to take my little brother to Carson every night. And after the races were over, you could go down to turn 1 and you could walk down across the track, and then this track was banked. You had to lean back to walk down the track. You walk over into the pits and go check out the cars, check out the damage. The engines were still hot. The tires were still hot. The smell of the rubber and the fuel in the air, it's like no other. You don't get that same sensation at a dirt track like you do at an asphalt track. That's the one thing I do miss. But I remember taking him over. He was a huge Big Al fan. And we walked over, and I'm like, ask him if you could sit in the car. And he's like, So I walked up to him. I'm like, dude, my little brother loves your car. Can you sit in it? And he was like, oh, man, you know what? You bet. Let me get this window net down, lift him up in there. He goes, just don't touch anything. And I'll never forget the smile that he had, man. When he sat down in that car, he couldn't see the dash. He couldn't see over the middle of the steering wheel.
Nope.
But that was the greatest part of the night, honestly, when we were there that night.
That was a fun night. And then we got further on in racing, and I actually got to race with Big Al, which was really cool.
Yeah, Big Al and his brother, and
Gary Nevers.
Yeah, the old school guys, the War Pony, Gary Nevers. It's, that guy, I don't know how long he went, man. He went 30, 40 some odd years, I think, something like that, without missing a race, racing at least once a season.
Yeah.
They're like Iron Men, but those are some pretty cool memories, I think, for us. And so
it was definitely good times, and I missed it that track closed.
Yeah,
it's really hard.
Yeah, it kind of sucks with developers taking over certain things these days, and kind of takes away the heartbeat of America.
Well, I hope you liked the trip down memory lane and enjoyed it as much as I did. But we hope you stay tuned to Rauscher Racing Weekly every Wednesday at 10 a.m.